Hi there and welcome to the inaugural edition of The Briefing Room, where the ABC News political team will bring you inside the White House press briefing with all of the latest reporting and analysis from Capitol Hill and on the White House and beyond. We are going to be joined by our whole team: Jonathan Karl, our chief White House correspondent, our congressional correspondent Mary Bruce, pollster Kristen Soltis Anderson, and more after the White House press briefing. As we said, we'll bring it to you every day, whether it's on camera or off camera. Today's is off camera, but it also features Press Secretary Sean Spicer for the first time in a couple of weeks. So we'll bring you that and be back in a few minutes to break it all down. For now, though, Sean Spicer.
People. And with that, I'd be glad to take your questions. Margaret.
Sean, good to see you back here. Question for you, too. One on Iran. Will this administration certify Iran's compliance with the nuclear deal?
The JCPOA authority was delegated to the State Department, and the Secretary of State will have an announcement very shortly on that deal. I think you all know that the President has made very clear that he thought this was a bad deal for the United States, and I will wait until the State Department makes further action before going any further.
And secondly, your counterpart in Russia, Dmitry Peskov, who speaks for Vladimir Putin, said today that they expect their properties that were seized by the prior administration to be returned and without any stipulations or attachments to that. Was this discussed with the President? Does the President have a strong view? What is it that the President would like to see in return before handing these properties back?
I know that Secretary Tillerson, that falls under his purview. He has been having discussions, and I would refer you to the State Department for.
This came from Vladimir Putin's office.
I understand that, but in our country right now, the Secretary of State is handling that portfolio, and so I would refer you to them on that.
Did the President bring this up at all in his conversations in Hamburg with Vladimir Putin?
I don't know. I'd be glad to find out on that. I don't believe it did, but I'd be glad to find out. Tolo.
Thank you, Sean. The President tweeted earlier today that most politicians would have gone into the meeting like the one Don Jr. attended in order to get info on an opponent. He said that's politics. His FBI director nominee said that anyone who was approached by a hostile government for opposition research should contact the FBI rather than taking the meeting. Who's right, and what's the White House's position on whether or not it's okay to meet with a hostile government for opposition research?
Well, look, I'm not going to get into the specifics of this, but I will say that that is quite often for people who are given information during the heat of a campaign to ask what that is. That's what simply he did. The President's made it clear through his tweet, and there was nothing that, as far as we know, that would lead anyone to believe that there was anything except for a discussion about adoption of the Maginski Act. But I would refer you back to counsel on that one.
Okay, and can I ask about counsel about Mark Kasowitz? He was reportedly he exchanged emails with a private citizen with a number of threats and a profanity-laced set of comments. Does the White House and the President still have confidence in Mr. Kasowitz to speak for the administration on this Russian matter?
Yes, he does. And I know Mr. Kasowitz has issued an apology in that matter. Zeke?
John, first, following up on To's question there, the President's tweet this morning regarding the Russian investigation, did Ty Cobb vet that? Could you talk a little bit about his role? Is his job here to manage the President's personal response to the Russia investigation?
Mr. Cobb, as you know, within the counsel's office there are various attorneys that have different portfolios, and while we have outside counsel, a lot of times the requests that we get from this room require us to go to counsel and say, can we answer this question? What can we say or can't we say? You do your best a lot of times to get us to make a case why this should be answered by the White House, and so we end up spending a lot of time talking to the counsel's office about what can and can't be referred to outside counsel, what still remains in our purview. And so it was the decision of the White House to bring someone on board that, like in a lot of other areas that we have counsels dedicated to that, there was significant interest in the subject to do that.
So in the case of the President's tweet this morning, was that something that went through Mr. Cobb?
I don't believe so.
And one follow on Made in America. You mentioned this Sikorsky helicopter on this park in the South Lawn that would be known as Marine One. Who paid for that to fly here from, I guess, probably Quantico? And also, is it appropriate to use military resources for a political event?
Well, it would be at Bowling, is where I believe that's held. But I think we're very proud. I mean, the idea is to showcase this week things that are made in America, and I know Sikorsky and the state of Connecticut are very proud of the fact that they contribute to our national security, that there are, I assume, hundreds, if not thousands of people whose job depends on that. And I think, like most Americans, we're all proud of the helicopter and other military equipment that so many Americans work tirelessly to do. So, of course, it's appropriate to highlight that. Hunter.
Thank you, Sean. I'm wondering whether you can tell us if Made in America Week will include the Trump Organization or Ivanka Trump brands committing to stop manufacturing wares abroad.
Say that. I'm sorry. If
this, as part of Made in America Week, if the Trump Organization or Ivanka Trump's brands will make any kind of commitment to stop manufacturing gifts, clothes, and other wares abroad.
So there's a couple things that are interesting about that question. First, I think what's really important is the president's agenda, regulatory relief and tax relief, are focused on trying to make sure that all companies can hire here, can expand here, can manufacture here. That's something that he wants for every company, and you've seen him talk about that extensively. With respect to his own companies, obviously it's inappropriate to discuss how anything would affect their own companies. But I can tell you that in some cases, there are certain supply chains or scalability that may not be available in this country. I'm not going to comment on specific products, but I will tell you that the overall arching goal, of course, though, is to grow manufacturing, to grow investment here in the United States, and to grow U.S. workers here. So that remains the overall objective.
Obviously, it might be a sacrifice given certain questions about going rates and stuff, but wouldn't it be sort of a way to show leadership?
Again, it's not appropriate for me to stand up here and comment about a business. I believe that's a little out of bounds. But again, I would go back to the president's broader goal, which is to create investment here, to bring back the manufacturing base. And I think when you look at a lot of these indices that measure confidence, both in terms of CEOs, manufacturers, and they're all-time highs. And I think part of that is that there's a lot of confidence that the president's agenda is going to accomplish that. Charlie?
Just a question about the DHS decision to allow 15,000 new temporary worker visas. How does that not conflict with the president's Hire America message?
Again, I'll refer you to DHS on this, but I think one of the things that you're seeing through this is it's not just the number; it's a lot of the qualifications and a lot of that goes through there to ensure that we are hiring and bringing in the people. As you know, the president has been supportive of the RAISE Act by Senators Cotton and Perdue, which seeks to really look at it more of a merit-based immigration system, and that's something that he continues to push for, and will continue to work with Senators Cotton and Perdue and others to help get that in a place that will focus more on merit-based and really provide the overall reform that he's been talking about for a long time. Dave.
Sean, thanks. What's the White House reaction to the government of Iran announcing that they've sentenced the Chinese-American student from Princeton to 10 years for espionage? And also, could you fill us in on any new sanctions on Iran?
I'm not going to comment on any new sanctions. If there are some, at that point, Treasury would be the one to make that announcement when that's appropriate. Obviously, we're disappointed in that, and with respect to that individual, he is someone that we're keeping an eye on. Yeah.
Thanks, Sean. With regard, I want to ask you about steel tariffs. The president told reporters on the plane last week that he was considering tariffs and quotas with regard to foreign steel.
Right.
This being Made in America Week, can we expect an announcement? Has the president made up his mind on whether he's going to do tariffs, quotas, or both?
I think that the president's comments on Air Force One speak for themselves. When he's ready to make an announcement on that, we'll share that with you. But that is something that the team is still discussing with him. John Decker.
Sean, thanks a lot, Sean. Is the president resigned to the idea that it seems unlikely that the Senate will vote on any type of repeal and replace bill anytime in the immediate future?
I know Senator McConnell has made it clear that he would like Senator McCain back. We obviously wish him a speedy recovery. And as soon as Senator McConnell, as soon as Senator McCain can travel back and Senator McConnell feels it's appropriate, he'll schedule that vote. We feel very confident about where we are now, and we look forward to getting that bill on the president's desk and getting it signed. Jim?
Yeah. I just wanted to ask you a real quick question. I realize you can't speak, as you said, specifically about the President Donald J. Trump Organization's companies, but just wanted to get a view from you on what critics are saying about whether the president is the right vessel for this message. After all, he has shirts made in China and Bangladesh and India, other products made like Trump vodka made in the Netherlands. So give me a sense, if you could, about whether the president is the right vessel for the message that he's going to deliver later today before the press.
Yeah, I actually look at it in a very different way, which is the president's been a very successful businessman on a number of fronts in a number of areas and industries. And to understand very firsthand what the tax burden and what the regulatory burden do to a business that wants to grow or expand here or hire here. So I think he actually is in a very unique way, understands the challenges that our regulatory system and our tax system put on businesses that want to hire here, that want to grow here, that need scalability and capacity here in a way that maybe isn't because of some of our arcane trade laws or regulations or our tax laws. So I actually think that he's in a very unique way able to talk about the challenges that so many of these companies face as they choose to expand and some of the tariffs and quotas that they face in other markets. You know, I know that some of the stuff you look at a company like Caterpillar who's out there and you talk to them about some of the tariffs that they face going into other countries. When you're talking about an earth mover, you know, a D11 or something else where you're talking about $1 million+ piece of equipment, a 20% tariff is $200,000. So if you're going into a country where our companies are disadvantaged by a huge tariff, that's immediately putting them at a disadvantage. And the president understands what that means to a company that wants to grow and expand throughout the globe and meet new markets and go into other places. So I think he understands it probably very, very uniquely. Fred.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Sean.
We'll get to you, Andrew. Don't worry.
Thanks, Sean. A couple questions on the Voter Integrity Commission's meeting on Wednesday. I want to ask you, without full cooperation of all the states, would the commission consider buying some of the registration information, sort of the way campaigns do, or using maybe a private organization like Aristotle International?
Most of this information is available. I mean, all what those companies are doing is buying it from the states. So, I mean, I don't think there'd be any reason to go to a private vendor. I think we should be able to do this utilizing official resources that exist within a state. Again, I think there's been some miscommunication on what they're seeking. The commission has asked that each state provide that information that is public, that they share. And because that varies from state to state, what they're willing to give out, the commission was illustrative in its letter in trying to describe what it was looking for. But I think we're going to move forward very well. Trey?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I did have another. And that's, there was hacking into voter registration rules in Illinois, Arizona. We found out recently South Carolina was reported. Is that going to be something the commission would look into at all?
I think the commission's got a very broad mandate to make sure that there's the greatest degree of integrity in our voting system and confidence in it. And so I don't want to get ahead of their agenda, but I think all areas like that are going to probably get brought up. But the first meeting's Wednesday. We'll see what comes of it. Trey?
Thanks, Sean. Two foreign policy questions for you. First, what steps is President Trump taking to ensure that the Israelis are comfortable with the U.S. brokered ceasefire in Syria?
So obviously, with respect that you're talking about Prime Minister Netanyahu's comments, one, I would refer you to him to that. But there's a shared interest that we have with Israel, making sure that Iran does not gain a foothold military base-wise in southern Syria. So while we're going to continue those talks, obviously we want to have a productive ceasefire, but we also want to make sure that we're not. One of our other objectives is obviously remains to make sure that Iran does not gain a foothold in southern Syria. So we need to continue to have that discussion with Prime Minister Netanyahu about his concerns, but I think there is a shared goal there. Eamon?
Thanks, Sean. With the health care bill in limbo, what's the administration's plan to move forward on tax reform? Can you do it without having moved on health care first?
Well, obviously, the Senate's still on track to vote, which is great, and the president will sign it as soon as it's as soon as it's possible. We're going to continue to plan. We've had well into the hundreds, if not close to 1,000 listening sessions with different entities, so not the number of entities, not the number of meetings. So they'll continue that outreach, continue to hear with folks. There's been a very robust discussion with House and Senate leadership and the committees of relevant jurisdiction. and we're going to continue that. But we're going to keep moving that along. I expect there will be some activity in August and then into September, but we're still on track to do that, and we hope to have the health care bill completely locked up as soon as Senator McConnell deems it's appropriate.
Sean, follow-up.
Kristen.
Thanks, Sean. There is concern among those who support the health care bill that this extension is going to give the opponents of the bill more traction. What specifically is President Trump going to do to try to get this bill over the finish line? What role is he going to play?
Well, I mean, he's been very active on the phone. He's going to continue to meet with senators. I think he'll have some senators over tonight. He's been very active over the weekend. The vice president's been extremely engaged as well. We'll continue those discussions. So, I think we're going to do what we did the last time. The president's going to be engaged. He's going to get this done. And then, it's been said before, but there's no one better than Mitch McConnell when it comes to knowing how and when to make a bill successful in the Senate. So we have every confidence in the majority leader's ability to get this done, and the president will do whatever he has to support those efforts.
And who's coming over tonight? Is it just
I don't have a list for you right now.
And one quickly on Russia. President Trump has referred to the Russia investigation as a hoax, a witch hunt. Given the meeting that Donald Trump Jr. had, does he now acknowledge that the special counsel is a legitimate investigation?
I think Mr. Sekulow answered that question very extensively this weekend.
What would you say?
I think it's been asked and answered. I think we did something to offend Kristen. David Jackson.
Sean, can you tell me how these products were selected in each of the 50 states, and do you know if most of the owners are Trump supporters?
I don't. You're free to ask them. I think the pool will be out there. I think there's some folks, so feel free to talk to them. This was an engagement where we asked for suggestions from governors and members of Congress to give us a list, and then working within the different offices here, an ultimate selection was made, but we sought input from the governors and the congressional delegation.
Sean.
Abby.
Since Friday, the president has tweeted 4 times about health care, but he's also tweeted 6 times about the U.S. Women's Open, which was held at a private property that is owned by his company. So the question is it appropriate for him to essentially advertise his private business using his Twitter feed and his time when comparatively less time is being spent on healthcare, an issue that, as you know, is the most important issue to Americans right now?
Well, I respectfully disagree with that. I mean, in the sense that sending off a tweet takes 5-10 seconds. As I just mentioned to Kristen, he's been extremely engaged throughout the weekend, making phone calls, talking to folks, meeting with his team, getting updates. So to compare a tweet with a meeting or a phone call of substance is probably a little.
But he did spend a lot of his weekend at the U.S. Women's Open and seemed to be very engaged in it. I mean, the tweets are perhaps a second long, but it seems to indicate what the president is spending his time on. So how do you assure the country that he actually is, in fact, engaged on health care?
Well, I mean, look at
we know where he was
right.
over the weekend. He's been tweeting about it.
Because I would suggest to you, one, I just told you that he's been extremely engaged in talking to different senators. I know that some of them have mentioned that they had extensive discussions with them. Number two, this is the same group. We got a lot of that it'll never get through the House. He continued to work hard, he continued to be engaged then, and it came out. We continue to do what we have to do, and we'll make it work. But we're going to get this done. We'll go move on. We'll do tax reform. We're going to do infrastructure. The president's got a very robust agenda, and I think when you look at the amount of activity that he's been able to do and the results that he's getting, I think that speaks for itself. Andrew.
Can I ask an American question, Sean?
Yeah,
just
sure.
a quick one. Ivanka Trump's, the head of Ivanka Trump's business said that it is currently not possible to make her products here in the United States. So what is the White House's or this administration's policy remedy for companies like that who say there's just no way to do it? How do they make their products here in America?
I mean, I can't answer that question in the sense that I'm not, but I can tell you that it depends on the product, right? I mean, there are certain things certain industries that we don't do as much anymore, and there's certain things that we do more. I mean, there's a certain thing that, certain aspect of technology and labor, but as I mentioned before, in terms of scalability, there's certain things that we may not have the capacity to do here in terms of having a plant or a factory that can do it. The beautiful thing about a capitalistic society is that if there's enough of a demand for it, it will happen. And I think that's what the president's trying to do, is if you lower the tax rate, if you lower the regulatory burden, you will hopefully grow businesses and grow manufacturing. I've talked to several CEOs and business leaders in the past couple of weeks about tax reform, and it's amazing how many of them tell you that they pay the 35% rate, and you say to them, what will you do if that rate drops? And the number one thing they talk about is they're going to invest and build more in their company. And I think that's what we need to do. But some lines, some industries, some products may not have the scalability or the demand here in this country. But like so many other things, that if that demand if there's enough of a demand, then hopefully someone builds a factory and does it. But we've seen that, in your own industry, where you saw the decline of newspapers, for example, and you've seen a lot more online content and online publications. That's the evolution sometimes of some industries. But I'm sure somewhere around the world, the newspapers still get delivered every day, in a much greater way than they do here.
Is it appropriate if there's no, in the case of Ivanka Trump's businesses, handbags, shirts, purses, whatever, if there's no capacity, is it appropriate to make those things overseas?
Well, think about all of the things that we buy every day. Of course, there's a market, because we depend in this country for so many goods and services, some of which are made in America, some of which aren't. Obviously, we want to create an environment in which more things are made here, more things are exported from here, and that's what the president's agenda sets out to do. So, I got to go to the birthday girl, Kayla. Oh, I'm sorry, Sarah.
Sarah. Oh, thanks. It's not my birthday.
No, I don't even want to get into it. It's Kayla's birthday. She's not here. I saw Amen. I thought CNBC. My apologies.
I'll take a second question.
Yeah, you already. And then I'll go to you.
Back to the JCPOA. I know you don't want to get ahead of the announcement about the recertification, but the administration has been reviewing it for some time now, even though the president has already made definitive statements about what he thinks should be done on the Iran deal. So did he make those statements without having sufficient information about the Iran deal, or is the review ongoing because he's open to changing his position on the Iran deal if new information came to light?
I've got to say, I think the president from throughout the campaign until now has made very clear that he thinks it's a bad deal. And initially he recertified it because they weren't, because he had the luxury of having an entire team here, both from state, national, DOD, NSC, to review it. That time is up, and state will make its announcement very shortly. But I think he's been very consistent with the fact that he thought it was a bad deal. So, Andrew.
Thank you, Sean. 2 questions and a short follow-up. When the president took office, one of the things he ordered was a 90-day cybersecurity review. That deadline came and went. It's been several months. Can you update us on where that report is? Has it been completed? And if it hasn't been completed, why?
I will get back to you on the report. He did sign an executive order on cyber, making sure that we have the resources necessary to protect our key critical infrastructure.
Right. And the same question. Last week there was a large online day of action on net neutrality, organized and participated by many of the largest companies in America, Amazon, Apple, Facebook, a lot of the technology economy that's driving the U.S. economy. Granted, the FCC is an independent agency, but does the president believe that network neutrality is an important thing and an open internet is important to the American economy?
Well, again, as you noted, the FCC is an independent agency. I would refer you to them with respect to House. I have not addressed net neutrality specifically.
Can you get back to it?
I will definitely get back to you, Katie.
Thanks, Sean. The Ukraine government reportedly went into damage control mode in an effort to make amends when President Trump won the election after working with DNC and Clinton administration officials to undermine his candidacy. Was this an issue that was discussed during President Poroshenko's visits to the White House in June? And has the president discussed it with him?
I actually, that's an interesting question. I will have to get back to you. Obviously there's been a lot more interest in recent days with respect to what the DNC did in coordination with the Ukrainian government to try to collude and achieve a goal of having someone removed, which ultimately did happen. So I don't know whether that came up with the president. I'd be glad to look into the call. I know that story and the DNC's collusion with the Ukrainian government has definitely gotten a lot more attention since that meeting. So I'm not sure that it was necessarily topical at the time. But now that there's been renewed interest in what the DNC did, I'm glad to look further.
Sean, what the DNC did have any impact on this administration's policies towards Ukraine?
I don't, it wasn't something that was discussed at the time of the visit that I'm aware of. I'd be glad to follow up and find out whether that did come up. But again, my only point is that at the time of the visit, I don't believe it was as topical it is now. George.
At a briefing last month, you said you didn't believe the president factored in, when he made a trip, what his popularity is in that country. Now we have a report of a transcript of a conversation between Prime Minister May and the president in which he asked her to quote-unquote fix his popularity so he gets a better reception. Do you have any reason to doubt the accuracy of that transcript, that conversation took place, and do you still believe that he doesn't factor in his popularity?
I believe that I'm not going to comment on rumored leaked conversations. I will say that he was pleased to accept Her Majesty's invitation and looks forward to visiting the United Kingdom. Ken.
North Korea, South Korea has offered to hold talks.
Right.
What's the president's view of that? And are there certain conditions that the president would like to see met before those talks take place?
Well, obviously, those comments came out of the Republic of Korea, and I would refer you back to them. That being said, I think the president's been clear in the past with respect that any type of conditions that would have to be met are clearly far away from where we are now. Jeff.
Sean, has the White House been monitoring the demonstrations in Venezuela? Do you have any reaction to that?
Yeah, we obviously are concerned about that. We've been watching what's been going on. We congratulate the Venezuelan people for the huge turnout in the referendum yesterday and the unmistakable statement that they made, that they delivered to their government. We condemn the violence inflicted by government thugs against innocent voters and efforts by the government to erode democracy in Venezuela. We once again call for the Constituent Assembly of July 30th to be canceled and for free and fair elections to be scheduled.
One follow-up on Iran. A senior commander in Iran's Revolutionary Guard said today that if the United States designated the group a terrorist organization and applied new sanctions, that it would be perilous for U.S. forces in the region. Do you have a reaction to that?
I don't think our forces will ever be. What was the word?
Peril?
No. I think our forces are the greatest fighting machine in the world, and we will do everything we can to protect our country and to make sure that we extinguish any threats that we face. Thank you, guys. Hope to have you get a good look at what's going on outside, and the pool will do a great job. Thanks.
Will you release the senators' names later?
Hi again, and welcome to the briefing room, where ABC News politics team is going to break down everything that you just saw, or at least you heard from Sean Spicer. Back at the podium, Catherine Faulders, a White House reporter, joining us right here. John Santucci, who covered the Trump campaign, probably at more events than anyone over the course of this.
Not as much as Donald Trump, but pretty close.
Yeah, so we've got a lot to bring you today, including a new ABC News Washington Post poll and President Trump getting on an ambulance at the White House.
Fire truck.
A fire truck, I'm sorry. Oh my God, can't believe I got that one wrong. Another kind of emergency vehicle. Speaking of emergencies, though, Russia, the big story, and our ABC News chief White House correspondent Jonathan Karl is joining us from just outside that briefing room where he was. And John, I want to play this again because I think it's an important explanation we heard today from Sean Spicer on Russia that seems to take the story backwards, not forwards. Take a listen.
Well, look, I'm not going to get into the specifics of this, but I will say that that is quite often for people who are given information during the heat of a campaign to ask what that is. That's what simply he did. The president's made it clear through his tweet, and there was nothing that, as far as we know, that would lead anyone to believe that there was anything except for a discussion about adoption of the Maginski Act. But I would refer you back to counsel on that one.
So as we said, John, it's been a while since Sean Spicer was at the podium. Was he not paying attention to the last week? Because a whole lot's happened that establishes actually quite the opposite of that.
It was really strange. I had to listen to it a couple of times after the briefing was over to make sure I had heard him right. I mean, you get the sense that he didn't read a newspaper over the past week or so. I mean, he said there was nothing, as far as we know, that would lead anyone to believe there was anything except for a discussion about adoption and then, as he mispronounced, the Magnitsky Act. That's so incredibly strange because we have Don Jr.'s emails, which came out last Tuesday, which said that this meeting was set up with a promise of information about Hillary Clinton, about negative information on Hillary Clinton tied to the Russian government. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Rick, but there was 4 pages of emails about this meeting, and I didn't see anything that referenced either the Magnitsky Act or adoption. I didn't see the word adoption in any of those 4 pages of email. So I don't know. That was really strange. Now, to Sean's credit here, he did say, but I would refer you back to counsel on that one. You know, Rick, this kind of brings me back to the days I spent some time here and on Capitol Hill during the days of the Lewinsky scandal and the Clinton administration. And Mike McCurry was the press secretary, and he had a strict policy. He did not deal with questions related to the independent counsel investigation or the lawsuits that were brought against the president. He referred those either to outside counsel or to Lanny Davis, who was inside but dealt with legal issues. It might be a good idea for Sean to approach it similarly.
And they're doing that to some extent, but then they have the president tweeting again in defense of Don Jr.
First thing this morning.
First thing this morning, right?
It doesn't stop. And you would think, though, for right now, for this investigation, that the president would take the advice we know that he's been given from legal counsel, which is don't talk about
from
it,
everybody,
don't get into it. Right,
yeah,
well,
yeah.
that's true, too, even from our poll. But you would think that right now that would be the first thing that the White House would do, is just stay away from it completely. And to John's point, you know, obviously he could instantly deflect and move on, but he's engaging in it. And it's as though he's really not paying attention to what's happening right now in the news cycle, or for that matter, the 5 pages of emails, John.
But John, don't you get a sense that part of the reason for that is that the president himself wants to see his people engaged on this and fighting back? So, I mean, for the president sitting back and watching, or I guess in this case he'd have to be listening, to hear simply, you know, you have to talk to somebody else about that, seems like somebody on his team is not stepping forward and taking on the fight.
You would think that. I mean, right away, of course, there's always been a briefing for one, John. I mean, you and I both know that this has always been something the president is an active watcher of TV. He installed a flat screen TV in the White House in order to watch the briefings. So, you know,
does he get his own feed? Like, does it's
off
off camera for him
mean,
too?
There's got to be a special camera, John. You need to look next time.
We're gonna find that out. I want to know.
There's got to be a specific camera.
So he goes
for
to the dining room
POTUS.
to watch it.
So he's able to watch it on camera.
Personal camera.
Right.
I didn't realize that. That's
You know,
that's really
you know,
interesting.
I don't know the answer to that. Do you know, John? Because I don't know.
Catherine,
is that true?
I don't know. I'm speculating.
All right,
here.
we like the idea of that.
Is it on camera for one person? That would be very interesting.
It would be, right? Like dinner for one. Something.
We'll have to inquire about that.
But the other thing that he's watching right now, John, and you know this, is of course this battle over healthcare and what's going on up in the Hill. We thought we would get the CBO score today, now hearing more likely tomorrow. But regardless, it seems like we're not going to get a vote for the next couple weeks. Obviously, this incident with Senator McCain that he went under surgery, but the White House is still not backing down. We saw Spicer say in the briefing the president's going to be hosting several senators tonight for dinner, John.
Yeah, he didn't say which senators would be coming, but I thought that was interesting because what I have been told is that vote is now quite likely to be pushed off until not just a week or two, but until September. We may not see a vote this summer on it. It all depends, of course, on when Senator McCain is able to travel again. This was pretty serious surgery, and you know he's not going to be in a position to travel. It's been suggested to me that it could be not just a week, but several weeks, which would put you into the middle of the August recess and a vote, you know, sometime after Labor Day.
So, Mary Bruce joining us from Capitol Hill. What's the buzz on the Hill about the situation with Senator McCain? They seem to be downplaying it, at least in the public statement. But as John points out, this might not just be a couple of days.
Yeah, the buzz up here is a lot of uncertainty. Look, this is another big surprise twist in the Republican quest to overhaul Obamacare. And guys, let's be honest, there have been quite a few twists and turns already. I mean, this bill right now, the future of it is uncertain, and now the timeline of this is uncertain. Following, of course, this surgery that John McCain had over the weekend, now, you know, his team says he's not expected up here this week. Question is, when will he be back up here? And let's remind everyone of the math here, right? Republican can only afford to lose 2 Republican votes if they want this thing to pass, and they've already lost those 2, right? They've lost Senator Rand Paul, they've lost Susan Collins, which means just one more no vote could sink this bill entirely. They need every single remaining Republican senator to get on board with this if this thing has any hope of passing. And right now, by our count, now, guys, I'm not a huge math whiz, but right now, by our count, at least 9 Senate Republicans are still on the fence or have deep concerns about this. That's a pretty big amount of room that they have to make up for. And one of those senators is John McCain. So not only do they need him back here in Washington before they can even think about trying to have this vote, to have a vote, but they also need him to get on board too. And the question now is, does this extra delay, does this help Leader McConnell? Does this help Republicans to try and get more support for their bill, or does this hurt that? Remember, this entire process has happened largely behind closed doors. There's been a lot of criticism that this process has been rushed, and certainly opponents of the bill say, extra time will only hurt Republican hopes here of getting this bill anywhere.
And what about dinner? I mean, who wants to eat with them right now among this group? I've been struck by how absent the White House has been through so much of this process. But Mary, are there a couple of really persuadable ones that might be dining tonight?
That's the question, and right now I have to say our thumbs are burning because we're trying to figure out, emailing everyone, calling everyone to see who exactly has received this invitation. Sean Spicer kind of snuck that one into the briefing there, but as John mentioned, look, there's been a lot of criticism that the president has not exactly been making a big public sell for this. I mean, in fact, we saw him almost, it seems, more engaged when the House was passing their version of the bill. I haven't talked to a lot of Republican senators up here who say that their phone is ringing off the hook with calls from the president and his team. That said, the president certainly has seemed quite eager to ramp up the pressure on Senate Republicans. You heard him last week saying if they can't get this done, he will be angry, he said. He said the nation will be very upset, that they have to get this done. The question is just how? And how are they going to bridge this incredibly deep divide that still remains? And it's worth a reminder, this is not just one part of the Republican Party that's voicing concerns. This is both sides of the ideological spectrum who have raised serious issues with this bill. You've got moderates who say it rolls back too much. You've got conservatives on the flip side who say it doesn't go far enough. And you've got this back and forth seesaw up here, and they haven't been able to strike that balance yet. And it certainly doesn't seem that simply delaying this, buying themselves more time is going to help that. Maybe dinner will. Maybe you can buy a couple votes over a nice meal up at the White House, but it remains to be seen. That's going to be an interesting dinner tonight.
Well, at least they'll have the extra scoop of ice cream.
Maybe he needs to give everybody else an extra scoop. Maybe that would help.
Ooh, good. The ice cream diplomacy.
And it's something that Mike Pence has always, been really involved into, having senators over and meeting with them. And he was on the road last week, and he's been up to the Capitol Hill many times.
And meeting with the governor.
Meeting with the governor. So now the president getting involved.
So John, back to you, because we heard the possibility of news a little bit later today on the Iran deal. We know that so far the White House has pushed this forward and certified Iran is keeping up its end of the bargain, but Spicer saying that there'd be an announcement imminently. What's the expectation that we'll hear anything new today?
Well, there has been, we have been expecting we'd hear something today. What was interesting, and in fact, we had expected there'd be a briefing at the White House today on this, but that did not happen. And when Sean was asked directly about this, he referred the questions to the State Department. So I guess the whatever happens on this, if it happens, will come from Rex Tillerson, the Secretary of State, over there in Foggy Bottom. I thought it was interesting in the midst of that discussion, though, while he wasn't directly answering what they were going to do on the Iran deal, the president was asked about the Chinese-American student who was sentenced to 10 years in prison in Iran in a move that was seen as a great violation. Sean was asked about this and was very muted in his response, a very muted response. We'll see if there's something more coming on that as well.
I read a little something, guys, into the fact that he's punting to state on that, because we know so much. We know Secretary Tillerson is so frustrated with what he sees at the White House.
Right.
And if this is a big announcement that's imminent, with Rex Tillerson driving the train, or the ambulance, or the fire truck, or whatever vehicle it may be.
You're not doing good with
tractor. What do you guys, do you think there's something there for them, for the White House to kind of back off of this one and let Rex Tillerson have a say?
How do you take that?
I think a little bit. I mean, I think going to what John said, there was supposed to be a briefing. There's not a briefing. I think, a little bit. Let's back up. Let's let Rex Tillerson chime in here. We've heard the president say multiple times on the campaign trail that the Iran deal was a bad deal, and I think you look at all of the, I wouldn't say turmoil, but what's going on between the State Department and the White House, and some of the screaming matches that have happened. So yeah, I think so. I think Sean is taking a little bit of a step back and saying, maybe we'll defer to them a little bit, or maybe it's that we just didn't have our act together on the briefing, and we
think it's
canceled
more
it.
that.
I think it's more that.
I think they have a little more work to do. I mean, they're obviously trying to get that deal done. The one thing they're celebrating this week, and John, you've been over there. It's Made in America week over at the White House. There's an item from all 50 states. We saw the president get on a fire truck, despite what Mr. Klein said. But it's.
You get to play with them too. I want to know, like, do
There's a boat out there too. There's a yacht.
Did you get on? What's it like out there? Are you seeing them? Are they around?
Well, I'll tell you, I was out here for Good Morning America at 7 o'clock in the morning, and a little before 7 o'clock, I heard a helicopter in the background. I looked back, and Marine One was landing on the South Lawn. That kind of startled me because that usually means the president is either coming or going. And then I realized it was all about this Made in America process because, of course, Sikorsky helicopter, based right here in the United States, makes that incredibly iconic helicopter part of the exhibit there. But one thing that came up in the briefing on this is the Trump Organization, as you know, Rick, and you know, John, because it came up countless times over the campaign trail, the question of where those Trump ties are made, where Ivanka's various products and her product line is made, and so many of them are made not in America. The question was asked, will there be a commitment from the Trump Organization as part of this Made in America week to make their products here in the United States, or more of their products here in the United States? And Sean didn't seem particularly eager to engage in that question. He is not, after all, to be fair, the spokesperson for the Trump Organization.
Right, and that big profile this weekend in the Washington Post, which I'm sure we all saw, going through Ivanka Trump's brand and where her products are made, and some of the dealings she had when she was running the company, and as the company has gone on without her, how they've been operating abroad. But the other part that we've all been watching, John, is the fact that this White House and how their briefings go, and Catherine, you're in there, they're mainly off camera lately.
Mainly off camera lately.
Not a lot lately with Sean Spicer.
Give us some numbers.
Oh, gosh.
Mary Bruce says she wasn't into math, so we
all
let
right,
you
I
do
have
it
the
that
numbers here. You're right. So this is Sean's, the one that just wrapped up his 7th briefing in the months of June and July combined.
Right, so we're halfway through July. So
we're halfway through July, so this was his 7th briefing, June and July.
But that's
halfway
on camera, off camera, both.
This is both.
Either kind.
Okay. This is his 4th of those 7, 4th off-camera briefing.
Okay.
So compare that to, can you take a guess? Sarah Sanders has been filling in a lot for Sean at the
Yeah,
podium.
yeah.
Those same months, she's briefed a total of how many times?
10.
12.
13.
Oh,
and as John noted, he was in there today. This was an off-camera briefing from Sean Spicer. This today is the 18th day since a White House official took questions on camera. The last time Sean Spicer took questions on camera was June 20th. So that's almost a month, Rick.
So John, is a Spicer Day different in the room than a Sarah Sanders Day?
Well,
just the vibe, everything.
Well, wait a minute. I want to go over these numbers from. So, Catherine, you're saying there have been 7 briefings since the beginning of June with Sean Spicer, right?
That's right. That's right.
And,
yes.
And you said 4 of these have been like today's, where cameras are prohibited, right?
Correct. That's right.
Okay. So
over 50%.
That means a little less. So that means Rick went to the fancy college. He knows the math really good. So that means we've had 3. We've only had 3 on-camera briefings from the press secretary since the beginning of June.
That's right.
Believe that to be the case, John.
That is.
You're right.
That is something else. Look, the atmosphere is different in there with Sean, but the substance isn't that much different. Sarah Huckabee Sanders came in and did her very first briefing amidst one of the crises, and I forget exactly which one that was engulfing the White House. And it's amazing how calm she can be no matter what is going on. So even though Sarah got thrown into this later and didn't have the extensive experience as a Washington communicator that Sean has had, almost 2 decades worth, she handles herself with absolute calmness and doesn't get rattled, and the substance ends up being very similar, I think, between the 2 of them.
So our
he's
thanks
he's a little more fiery. I'll say that, but she can be tough.
But today wasn't.
He wasn't too fiery today, John.
That fiery. Yeah.
Today was a little calm.
Yeah, today was pretty calm. today
All
was
right,
pretty
John,
calm.
John Carl, we're going to let you get back to managing your fantasy baseball lineup. Thanks to our chief White House correspondent. Our thanks also to Mary Bruce over on the Capitol for joining us in our first ever briefing room. We have some bonus baseball for you, though, because there's a new ABC News Washington Post poll that is just out in the last couple of days, out last week in the wake of the latest revelations. Got some really interesting numbers. We're going to be joined by Philip Bump from the Washington Post, in addition to Kristen Soltis Anderson, an ABC News contributor who is also a Republican pollster. Kristen, let's start with you because you do polls for a living. You look at a poll like this, what do you think? What do you take away?
The president started off his presidency without very high job approval to begin with. Typically, presidents get a honeymoon. This president did not. But it's a bad sign for him that his numbers continue to go even lower from that high watermark, only having 36% approval in the most recent ABC poll. Now, a lot of this is being driven not by disagreements with the president over issues. In fact, in this poll, he tends to get really good marks for things like his handling of the economy. But it's on questions about his personality, things like whether or not he's acting presidential or not, where he gets much worse marks. Only about 1 in 4 people think he behaves in a presidential way, and the same number think that his tweeting is something that is positive. Only 24% approve of his tweeting. So most of the problems that voters seem to be having with this president, the folks that are undecided or swing voters kind of in the middle, they're not objecting to his policies per se, but the way he's handling his time in office.
Okay, so some of these numbers, guys, fascinate me. So fascinating, in fact, I wrote them down. So it's 23% who say that Donald Trump's doing a better job than most presidents.
You can read that, Rick?
I wrote it. So yeah, 24% think his behavior fitting and proper. 24% are okay with his use of Twitter. 27% say that there's stronger leadership in the world. And this one really is startling to me. 26% say that Don Jr.'s contacts with the Russians are okay. So these are all really bad numbers, Philip Bump. But read another way, as you point out in a posting today, that's 1 in 4 Americans who live in what you say is the Trump bubble. 1 in 4. That's not insignificant.
Right. It's not insignificant. No, that's true. I mean, it certainly is the fact that this repeat of the 25%, 26%, 27% suggests that there is this core nugget of people who we have known about essentially since Donald Trump first started running. We knew that there was this core base of support. He could, all of these things that happened that were so unusual on the campaign trail, and we knew he never lost that core of support. He continues to keep that core of support. The challenge was that in 2016, he was running against Hillary Clinton, who was very, very unpopular as well. And the question is, if he, in 2020, if these numbers hold, which is a giant if since it's only 2017, if these numbers hold, will that be enough to actually get him across the finish line? It's hard to see how it could be.
You know, I just remember that one line, Phil, from when Trump was on the campaign trail. I think he said it in Iowa. That he could go out onto Fifth Avenue and shoot someone, and he wouldn't lose any of his supporters.
That's these people.
And you see it. That's those people. No matter what, they are the Trump loyalists.
They're not going anywhere no matter what.
They are totally all-in fanboys for Donald Trump, and they believe in everything he's saying or doing. And Kristen, I'm curious how tying this back to the use of social media, because it seems to me like a lot of these folks would populate an echo chamber for the president. And when he's out there talking about the great progress that he's making, he's channeling these people.
Well, there are a lot of folks that are in Trump's orbit that view, even when he has conflicts or even things that are traditionally viewed as setbacks, they view them as opportunities. Anytime he gets into a conflict with the media, it's a chance to demonstrate that he's a strong guy. They love trying to convert things that would conventionally sound negative into something that is positive or tries to reinforce one of his good attributes, which is why I think even though these numbers for any other president would look really bad, you know, moving into a midterm, you'd think congressional Republicans would be very nervous that the president's numbers are so bad, and yet his numbers are actually somewhat better than what you see for, say, congressional Republicans, and that there are a lot of folks that may not want to elect a Congress that would cause more gridlock. So Republicans and Democrats both on Congress in a very complicated situation going into the midterms next year.
But Kristen, talk about our poll, though, and what the numbers as far as independents are concerned show for the president, because that seems to be the area that he actually is losing a bit of ground.
That's right. So Donald Trump does very well among folks who call themselves Republicans. He's held on to an awful lot of them. Even the ones that think they don't necessarily love his tweeting or they think that he's not always very presidential, he still hangs on to a big chunk of his own party. But it is a lot of those independents that were perhaps willing to give him a chance, as Philip mentioned. Maybe they voted for him not because they liked him, but because they just really didn't like Hillary Clinton, who have been playing a little bit wait and see. Maybe they said at the beginning of his presidency they somewhat approved of the job he was doing, but are still waiting to see those results that he's promised. And so whether he can deliver will have a big impact on, I think, whether or not those folks are still in his camp come next November.
And when it comes to delivering, one number that you know that they're comfortable with over at the White House is their approval rating on the economy. Philip Bump, it seems to me that if you just have that, if he's above water just on the economy, they kind of like their chances going into the midterms.
Well, probably. I mean, when we say above water, that's all within the context of Donald Trump's very bad poll numbers, right? So his numbers are not particularly exceptional on the economy. But I think it's important to remember something that was just pointed out, which is that there actually is a policy issue on which people are very unhappy, and that is health care. And by a 2-to-1 margin, people reject the idea that the Republican plan is better than Obamacare. Again, we have that same quarter of the respondents saying that they like the Republican plan better. The reason that's important is because that's probably going to be something that's looming big over the 2018 elections. And one of the things to remember about Donald Trump's core support is it tends to be more conservative, the more conservative Republicans, who are also the bulk of the primary electorate. And not necessarily the bulk, but they make up a higher proportion of that primary electorate than they would the general pool of Republicans. And for Republicans on Capitol Hill who are paying attention to this, they are going to see that the people who come out and turn out in the primaries are very, very much on Donald Trump's side, very, very much support this health care bill, and that's why we're seeing this tension on the Hill. It's a very unpopular bill, but with those primary voters that the Republicans need in order to be reelected, it's pretty popular.
All right, Philip Bump from the Washington Post, Kristen Soltis Anderson, thank you guys for being here on our inaugural edition of the Briefing Room.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Before we wrap right here, guys, what'd you learn today? Takeaways.
Oh, man.
Come on, jump in.
Yeah, you
jump
go
in.
first, John.
I go first. Listen, I do think the one key thing from our poll, which they were talking about, was the economy. And I do think if you go and look at how this president campaigned, I think of one line in particular from his speech at Trump Tower in June 2015. I'll be the greatest jobs president that God ever created.
Yeah.
And if he continues to push the economy, make that his signature mission, if obviously his Treasury Department's out there showing that they're doing better and better than estimates with jobs, I think as our poll shows that he really has to campaign on that. As far as the briefing's concerned, there's a couple emails I'll forward to somebody. Might help him next time.
Right. I mean, as far as the briefing is concerned, it seems like Sean really has taken 3 weeks, a month off of work, given the response to the Russia email and Don Jr. in saying that only adoption was discussed. And to the broader point about the poll.
Yeah.
The point that you made with your numbers right there.
Thank
the
you.
Point
I have numbers.
Your great numbers, and the point that
You
made
can't read
with the
those
quote.
numbers,
Well,
though.
right,
Come
you can't read the point that you made with the quote. I could go out on Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody.
yeah.
And it doesn't matter. I think what you learn, if you learn anything about our poll, and what you said is that his base is there. It's not going away.
And I'll tell you, the picture of the day ends up being the president getting into an emergency vehicle of
Do
any
we have
sort.
that?
With Mike Pence.
That to me, and I think that that people will have a good
There it
time
is.
with this.
There it is, right there.
Right on cue.
People will have a good time with this, but I'll tell you, that's going to be on a lot of newspaper front pages.
That
It's
seems
going
like a
to be, it's going to be,
different one.
it's
No,
going to be
that's
seen
it.
That's
quite a
That's
bit.
it.
The president getting in, and he loves it.
Yeah.
And it's a pretty powerful image. Again, if the message of the day is jobs.
Right.
Hey, Rick, what do we call those things?
I don't
Things.
know. What do you mean? Is this
That's
like
a fire
the
truck.
The fire truck, right? Okay, there's making.
emergency vehicle. It's a generic description. All right, guys, we had a lot of fun today, and we are going to be back tomorrow and any day that the White House has a briefing. For John Santucci and Catherine Folders, I am Rick Klein. Watch us next time.